Today, Emily and I welcome Dr. Peter Kleponis. He's a pastoral counselor and the director of Integrity Counseling Services in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Kleponis is passionate about helping people break free from the chains of pornography and sex addiction. He has over 25 years of experience working with individuals, couples, and families. He specializes in marital therapy, resolving anger, men's issues, and pastoral counseling. He is a devout Catholic and sees God as the ultimate healer. He incorporates Catholic spirituality into his therapeutic processes. Dr. Kleponis travels throughout the United States and internationally, educating Catholics on how to win the battle against pornography through his Fighting Porn in Our Culture and Winning program. He has presented his conferences to numerous dioceses, colleges and universities, seminaries, religious communities, parents groups, men's conferences, and other Catholic organizations. Dr. Kleponis has also been a guest on EWTN television programs such as Women of Grace, Franciscan University Presents, Crossing the Goal, At Home with Jim and Joy, and EWTN Bookmark. He's a regular guest on Relevant Radio's On Call and Morning Air programs. Dr. Kleponis resides in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania with his wife Maria and their sons John and Matthew. Join us in welcoming Dr. Peter Kleponis to the podcast.
Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Emily and I have with us today Dr. Peter Kleponis. He is a pastoral counselor and the director of Integrity Counseling Services in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, which I'm somewhat familiar with. We lived in Pennsylvania when I was younger. I grew up as a military brat, and so we lived in Bucks County, and then we also lived just outside of Harrisburg. So King of Prussia came up a lot. Is there a lot of shopping in King of Prussia?
Yes, the largest mall on the East Coast is located in King of Prussia, the King of Prussia Mall.
Okay. That's why I'm vaguely remembering that. So it's near Philadelphia. Is it on the Philadelphia side of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we're in the western suburbs of Philadelphia.
Okay, that would be why, yeah, because I remember my family never went there, but I remember having a lot of friends in middle school when we were talking about, what are you doing on the weekend? And they would say, we're going to go to the King of Prussia Mall. So I never got that experience, but I'll have to go. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Kleponis. Do you mind giving our audience just a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name is Dr. Peter Kleponis. I'm a licensed clinical therapist. I am also the director of Integrity Counseling Services. We are Pennsylvania's only private group Catholic counseling practice. We have 7 therapists on staff, all are wonderful practicing Catholic therapists, and we strive to incorporate our Catholic spirituality into the healing process because we know that, God is really the author of all healing. So in addition to using, all the latest techniques and methods in psychology, we bring in the Catholic faith too.
And even though you're based in Pennsylvania, do you see clients from across the country, around the world, or just in Pennsylvania?
We do. We have therapists who are licensed in other states who can do that. We also do see clients from around the world. It's funny. It comes in waves. Right now, I've got about 3 clients from New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
So, English-speaking countries, of course.
Right.
But we have worked with people from around the world.
Great. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit about the specific focus of your counseling, because it is a little unique.
It is unique. All of our therapists have unique specializations. My area of specialization is actually sexual addictions, in particularly internet pornography addiction. I've developed a program, the Integrity Starts Here Recovery Program, which is, as far as I know, the only comprehensive Catholic recovery program for pornography addiction.
Now, when you say pornography, what do you mean by that?
Well, very good question, because in order to talk about pornography, the first thing we need to do is define it.
Right.
What is porn? And that can be hard to nail down, because pornography can mean different things to different people. My definition of pornography is that it's any media that leads a person to use another person for their own sexual pleasure. It is devoid of love, relationship, and intimacy, and can be highly addictive.
Mm-hmm.
So now, according to this definition, the key word is using another person. And that's what pornography is all about. That's what lust is all about. Mm. So, for example, when a man is looking at a woman on the internet, he's probably not thinking that she's a person with thoughts and feelings. He's probably not thinking that she's somebody's daughter or wife or mother. Mm-hmm. He's not thinking about the terrible circumstances that may have led her into the pornography industry. And believe me, they are terrible. No one wants to be there. All he knows is that she is there for his sexual pleasure, and he is going to use her. And of course, God did not create his children to be used. Right. Now, also, according to this definition, the image he's looking at doesn't have to be unclothed. Right? Again, it's all about using them for selfish sexual reasons. And that's how I define pornography.
So I often hear pornography. Emily, jump in, okay, whenever you have.
Of course, sure.
I often hear, I guess more or less recently, I will hear quite frequently that there's an epidemic of pornography. So would you agree with that? And how would you define, an epidemic? What makes it an epidemic?
Well, I would definitely define it as an epidemic, because, this is something that is affecting so many lives. What the research shows us is that, over half of Americans are looking at pornography at least once a month. 85% of teenagers have had at least one exposure to hardcore pornography. And of course, right now, the largest single population of internet pornography users are 12 to 17-year-olds. So this really is a problem in our society, and I don't see it getting better any sooner. With all the new technologies that are coming out, AI, virtual reality, new forms of social media. So, we really need to confront this epidemic.
So 12 to 17-year-olds, is that what you said?
Yes.
Do you attribute that a lot to, I don't think kids are, riding their bikes down to the 7-Eleven and buying a Playboy anymore, or having their older brother buy them a Playboy. So is it mainly because they're all given smartphone? A lot of them have smartphones now. They have access, kind of untethered access to the internet. And then, you can Google something innocent and have a pornographic image come up. So is that kind of the main culprit?
Exactly. Yes. Mostly all teenagers now have cell phones. They have smartphones. They have iPhones. All have access to the internet. Very few of them are being monitored by their parents. Only 12% of parents actually know what their children are doing on the internet, and most are unaware of it. In fact, there was a study done recently that found that 55% of all internet pornography is viewed on cell phones. And right now, the number one gateway into pornography is social media. Mm. Now a lot of these platforms say they monitor everything and they make sure bad stuff doesn't get through, but believe me, a lot falls through the cracks.
Well, and it's sorry, I didn't mean to.
And now there are even social media platforms specifically for pornography, for amateur pornography. Right. So this is where it's all coming from.
Right. Well, and to your point about it doesn't even have to be a nude image necessarily, or a sexual act being videotaped. Mm-hmm. It could just be, I'm on social media, and sometimes just the images that I know people that post of themselves, like some of these selfies are in scantily clad outfits and suggestive poses. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's just not necessary and could be somewhat pornographic. However, compared to what is pornography nowadays, it almost looks like it's rated G. It's just like we've increased. Yeah, we've just upped to the bar, I guess, of what is considered, modest. What's considered modest nowadays would maybe be considered, very scandalous back in the day, if you will. Not even back in the day, too far back. Yeah.
And the way the algorithms work with social media is if a person, just even by accident ends up, clicking on a few suggestive images, the system's going to pick that up and feed them more of those images. And often those images can become more extreme. So the way the systems work, the way the algorithms are set up, it's really encouraging people to get further into the pornographic realm.
I recently came across some information that said when a new user signs up, I think the information was speaking specifically about Instagram. When a new user signs up, they are immediately given just some very, I'm going to use the word basic, but just very soft, if you will, images. Some of the advertisements are just kind of, what lots of people would probably consider normal. And then if they get clicked on, then they really start flooding that account with different things. And so for somebody that might be getting on there, I'm just trying to be generous when I think about a young teen that wants to get on there to connect with their friends or whatever, and the parent not having any idea that the exposure is just as extreme as it is, just right off the bat, from what I understand. That's very concerning, I feel like.
It is. It is. I mean, you think of most teenagers, they're into puberty, they're getting into relationships, they're becoming sexual people, they're interested in sex, they want to learn about it. And so naturally, they may be curious and they may type in a few sexual terms or whatever. But again, that can get the system running to where it thinks, all right, this is what this person is interested in. Let's feed them more of this. All right. So this is the way the system works. And it can be pretty scary as to what it can lead young people to. Another thing that a lot of parents don't realize, with social media, it's not just the pornography, but naturally on social media, you have lots of friends, you have lots of followers, and so forth. I always ask parents, all right, your child has all these friends and followers. Do you know who these people are? Most of them have no idea. And I cringe whenever I see middle schoolers, 11, 12, 13-year-olds with these smartphones, and they have all of the social media. Not only are they giving their children access to all the pornography out there, they're giving every single sexual predator access to their children. So now, of course, in our church, we have all these safe environment programs, which are good and needed. However, I have to tell you, the sexual predators aren't hanging out in the schoolyard anymore.
Right.
They're online.
Right.
And we have to be aware of that.
Right. Yeah. We have the safe environment training, and then everyone's at Life Teen with their cell phone. Yeah. Seems somewhat contradictory. So, okay. It's a problem. It's an epidemic. It's an issue. One of the things Emily and I talk about a lot is that one of the main challenges to natural family planning is our expectation in entering marriage and what sex looks like within marriage, and how our worldview, our expectations are formed about what sexual frequency might look like, right? Sexual acts themselves might look like within marriage, and how if you come to marriage not well formed, and I say well formed meaning like you're formed with like a Catholic sexual ethic background. So understanding that sex is a gift between a man and a woman, one man and one woman, that it's for the whole of life, that it's for the procreation and education of children, that it's for a giving of each other as mutual gifts, and that the pleasure that's found in that union is for, life to come forth from it, should God decide to bring forth life from that. So all of those things, right? That it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's how God designed it. Many of us nowadays are coming to marriage not formed in that. And so if we are to discover that, apart from like some radical transformation or conversion, the shift to it is challenging. It's going from I'm going to use a food example, so forgive me, I don't mean it to be, I guess downplaying like the grandness of the sexual act, but it's like having a cookie every night, and then you realize, oh, I can't have a cookie every night. Like that's kind of a once or twice a week thing, or a once every other week thing, like there's actually like limitations to this enjoyment of this pleasure, and even more so with another person, right? Because it's respecting the dignity of the human being. So I say all that. In what way, and I mean, I think I know the answer to this question too, but I feel like it'd be nice to hear it from a professional. In what way is pornography only contributing to these challenges within marriage by totally skewing our idea of sexual reality? Because pornography is not reality. It's not reality. It's not what it actually looks like when you get married, and you're just setting all these people up for failure.
Well, it's not just pornography. It's our culture. It's the mass media.
Right.
And it has led a lot of people to have, very misguided expectations about sexuality and in marriage. According to the media, like we should be having sex 3 times a day, 7 days a week. all the time, and that's just not reality. Studies have shown that the average couple has sex about once a week, right? And the question is, well, why is that? Well, for most couples, that's all they need. They're satisfied with that. So, we need to get back to reality with the expectations of what it's all about. Another thing specific to pornography is that it's presenting this idea about sex, that sex is all about simply using another person so that I can have the strongest and best orgasm possible. That's all it's about. It's not about giving. It's not about relationship. It's not about children. It's not about bonding. None of that. None of that. It's basically, what do I need to do to have the strongest orgasm possible? And if that means using another person, that's okay. We call that the sexual utilitarian philosophy. And that is simply the idea that it is okay to use another person for one's own sexual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're getting. So again, from the mass media, that idea that, everybody needs to be having sex, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And then from pornography, and that it's all about orgasm.
Right.
Another thing that we have to understand is that, in our society, people often talk about sex as a need.
Right.
That have to get met. And I tell people, sex is not a need, right? Food and water is a need. If you don't have food and water, you'll die.
Emily, right? And I say this all the time.
But, if something should happen, unfortunately, where you could not have sex for the rest of your life, yes, it would be a difficult cross to bear, but it wouldn't kill you, right? So what is sex? Sex is an appetite. And like any appetite, it must be fed properly. Now, I may have an appetite for chocolate ice cream, but if I have it 3 times a day, 7 days a week, I'm going to get tired of it. It's going to get old. It's not going to be interesting anymore. It's blah, blah, okay? But if I save it for special occasions, maybe once a week or whatever, it's wonderful. It's wonderful, and it's healthy. And that's what we have to look at.
To elaborate on that example, when does the chocolate ice cream just not become enough? When do you need more sprinkles and more this and more that? And, where does that lead you? I just feel like, we hear all of this information about pornography, how, it's just it's a slippery slope of how far can it be taken, and what does that involve? Open marriages, just all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how.
Well,
yeah.
The brain is always looking for that which is new and novel and interesting and different. It is, and it gets tired and gets bored very quickly. Again, so if you're doing the same thing every day over and over again, the brain's going to get bored and want something different. And I believe this is what happens. When people come into marriage with this idea that I should be having sex every day, and every day it should be wonderful and great and fantastic and new and everything. And after a while, it gets old. This is what leads people into things like pornography or extramarital affairs or whatever. And there's this idea that, well, because the sex in my relationship is no longer satisfying, well, maybe we just should get divorced and find someone new. I see a lot of this, and people are really misguided.
And I actually think back to the line in Scripture, which is always such a gut punch to me, of when Christ warns, "Woe to who, by whom sin comes." And I think, well, these poor people poor people, I was one of them, right? Like when you're formed by the culture, and that's what sets your expectations, and then you meet reality, and you're just thrown for such a loop. Like, wait a second, this is not what I was told. I was told that pornography is fine. In fact, that it's good before I get married, right? Because I'll get an idea of what sex is like. I can quote unquote practice. And then you meet the person you're going to marry, and you marry them, and then it's very different from what you were told, whether it's the expectation of frequency, intensity, whatever it is. And then this person is no longer living up to your expectation, which there's that very statement as a married woman to think, if I was disappointing my husband because I did not live up to some video that he saw of another woman, oh my gosh, like how gut-wrenching, it makes total sense to me that when spouses, when pornography enters a marriage, it feels like an extramarital affair. Like I'm not good enough. Like there's something better. But I also have come to find, like, I feel compassion for the person that's struggling with the pornography, because when you're fed the message of like, no, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay, and there's no one, on the blowhorn saying it's not okay. It's not going to give
There's
anything
no
to
counter
promise.
opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
not going to, fulfill any of those goods that it's saying it will. It's Satan, right? He's leading you into the hole. He drops you in, and then he just laughs and walks away. He's not the good shepherd.
Exactly. People have been led astray,
Right.
And I talk to a lot of people that work in the area of marriage prep, pre-Canaan marriage prep and so forth. Um, and I always tell people, if you're ever working with a couple, don't ask them if they view pornography. Just automatically assume they've seen it. All right, this is where we are. But I think a good question to ask a couple is, okay, what has pornography taught you about sex?
Right.
All right. And there you'll find out, what is this couple's beliefs about sex? What do they know about it? What is their definition of sex? What do they see as sex, the way sex should be in a marriage? And usually, again, it'll be totally skewed, a very worldly view. And then the marriage prep people can come in and say, okay, let's talk about God's plan for sexuality.
Right. Right.
And what's really out there. And that's what I love about the work that I do, in the field of Catholic psychology, because when we talk about sex, we have to go back to a basic question. What is the purpose and meaning of sex?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the secular world, the only answer they can give is, well, it's whatever you want it to be. In the Catholic world, we can definitely say, this is the meaning and purpose of sex. This is how God planned it, and this is how he wants us to enjoy it. And I think that's very important. People should know this is to be enjoyed.
Right.
Right? But within the right context.
Right. Right. I think about that. One of the most, when I was coming back to the faith and reading Theology of the Body, one of the most, I mean, it made me blush a little bit when I was reading some of John Paul II, and the part in the marital act when John Paul says that men have to wait for women so that they can reach that point of climax together, because at that correct me if I'm wrong, okay, Dr. Kleponis, but that climactic experience, this side of heaven, that's as close as we're going to get to any feeling of ecstasy that we will experience when we are face to face with God Almighty.
Yeah.
And that John Paul says that men have to be in such control and willing the good of their wife and waiting for her to get there. I'm blushing now just even re-saying it. It's like, that is so powerful. Like if that beauty, if only that beauty, right, was more presented to people, especially to young people, right, as they're curious, right, and rightly so, right, they're going through this time of puberty, hormones are changing, they're interested in this topic. Well, if we can get to them the truth and the good and the beautiful first before they're met with kind of the garbage, it's like fast food versus the buffet analogy.
Yep.
So, okay. So I like there's so many ways to tackle this, but obviously you're kind of on the front lines and you work with couples who are struggling with this right now in their marriage. What is your first recommendation? So a couple comes to you and most likely, right, it's the husband that is dealing with some pornography issue. And do you deal with couples together? Do you deal one-on-one? How do you like to deal with people, and where do you like to start?
We deal both one-on-one and with couples. And often when a couple comes in and they're dealing with sexual addiction, it's not always the man who's addicted. All right. Pornography addiction is an equal opportunity addiction. It does not discriminate. Women become addicted too. So, but there's usually, three types of counseling that we do. There's the counseling for the person who's addicted, because they need to be in a comprehensive recovery program. There's the counseling for the offended spouse, because oftentimes they're very traumatized. We even have a name for that, and we call it betrayal trauma. And the symptoms can be very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. So they need to heal from that. And then we do marital therapy to help the couple heal their marriage, heal their relationship that's been torn apart by pornography. So it's really three kinds of counseling. And like I said, I've got a wonderful staff of therapists that we're all available to be able to help couples with this.
In your books, do you recommend? Oh, sorry, Emily. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I was just curious, when couples come to you, what stage do you feel like, are they on the brink of divorce? Do they find you as like a last resort, or would you say that you're relatively well known in this community and in this world, that people know, or maybe they can find you online pretty easily? I just wonder if both spouses come willingly to this, or what that looks like. I'm just thinking about other addictions and interventions kind of situations. I'm wondering, do you see things like that?
Well, again, I'm very blessed to be in a Catholic practice because people seek us out. And usually the people who seek us out do have a very strong Catholic faith. They're coming to us because they recognize this is a problem and they want to save their marriage. They want to save their marriage. They don't want it to end. And they're usually both are willing to work on this. They're willing to work on it. So I'm very blessed with that. And I'm the eternal optimist, and when it comes to working with couples, I'm like a dog with a bone. I want to do everything I can to help this marriage succeed, to heal the marriage. And it's interesting because the research has shown that, of course, pornography, it is a form of infidelity. But infidelity does not usually tear marriages apart. It doesn't. Okay, Doctors John and Julie Gottman, the nation's #1 experts on marriage, cute little Jewish couple. They've been studying marriage for over 40 years. They know what makes marriage work. They know what tears marriages apart. And what they found is there are 4 things that can tear marriages apart. They call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And they are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. All right. That's what tears marriages apart. So even when a couple comes in and they're really struggling because of pornography addiction and infidelity, as long as we don't have those 4 horsemen, we can, do wonders with marriage. Well, we don't do wonders. God does wonders with it, but we can work with them. And most couples that come to us, they really want to work on this.
That's really helpful and encouraging.
I think the first thing couples have to understand when it comes to any addiction is that the behavior is the symptom. All right. And what we need to find is the root cause. And 90% of the time, the root cause has nothing to do with pornography or has nothing to do with sex. All right. It has nothing to do with sex. It has nothing to do with the wife's beauty, her desirability, anything like that. What is the pornography? It's the escape. A person could have chosen drugs, alcohol, gambling, anything else, but why pornography? It's the most easily accessible. It's in your back pocket.
So I have I have 3 questions, but 2 scenarios I wanted to get your thoughts on. So the first is, say there's a married couple and the man feels, very disrespected by his wife and doesn't almost, kind of has reached a point where he just feels deflated and defeated, and he looks at pornography, and he specifically looks at pornography that betrays, men kind of dominating women, not necessarily in like an angry way, but in a way that kind of feeds what it is he feels lacking. Like he doesn't feel like a man, and this makes him feel like a man. And that's found out, and there's hurt, and he feels guilty and kind of going down that spiral. And while it's not her fault, right? He can make his own choices. It's almost like a crying out for help in the marriage. I guess I'm just curious, like in that situation, how would you counsel them? How would you see that? Because I hear that scenario and I hear, oh, well, maybe, he's needing something. To your point, right? It's not about the porn. There's like a deeper issue. Like he doesn't feel respected in his marriage. So anyway, that was just a scenario that I had thought of, and I wanted to hear your thoughts.
There is, and again, the type of porn a person pursues can tell us a lot about what the inner need is. And as I said, most of the time, the inner need has nothing to do with sex. But what I tell couples is I say, when a couple comes to me, I tell them, I have 3 clients here. I have a husband, I have a wife, and I have a relationship. All right, and both of you contribute to the relationship, and that's what I want to look at. Of course, the pornography, it's not the fault of the wife. It's not because she wasn't beautiful enough or sexual enough or available, anything. Not at all. Okay, and his use of pornography is all on him. That is his responsibility. That is his choice. No matter what's going on in your life, you could choose to deal with life's challenges in many different ways. You don't have to choose porn, right? That's all on him. However, looking at the relationship, we have to ask, what is going on in this relationship that makes him feel the need to escape? into porn. And again, porn is the escape. That's what it is. What is it going on? And it could be the fact that he does not feel respected. He does not feel loved. He's very lonely. Very lonely, could be very frustrated. He loves his wife dearly, but just very frustrated, doesn't know what to do. He's at wit's end,
Right.
you know. And of course, again, how he chooses to deal with it, that's all on him.
Right.
That's his responsibility.
Right.
He could choose anything else, but still, we got to get to the root of it. And as I said before, 90% of the time, it's not about sex.
Well, and
it's usually a relational or an emotional need.
Yeah, it reminds me of in Al-Anon, that 12-step recovery program. One of the things they say is, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, but you can contribute to it. So I'm just trying to think, like if we're talking about sex addiction here, pornography addiction, it's like, well, then in what way can a partner be contributing to it? And I use the air quotes kind of to say it lightly, but yeah, in that case, like, well, if she was more respectful to her husband, would that wound, maybe it would surface in another way. Who knows? Maybe he would still look at porn. I don't know. But, is that a way that, is that a way that she could be contributing to it, if you will? So
it could be. It could be.
Okay.
There's so many variables we're looking at here.
Right. Right.
This, and again, when we're looking at pornography addiction, when we talk about, getting to the root of it, the root is never just one thing.
Right.
It's usually a combination of things. When we get to the roots of addiction, it's like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling disrespected by your spouse, that may only be one piece.
Right.
There could be a lot. It could be going back to emotional wounds from childhood. There's a lot that could be going on here.
Right. Right. And so I also was curious too. We see this influx, this epidemic in pornography use. I know you said that there are women doing it too, but there's also a lot of, mainly men. It's still a percentage, right? It's still majority men that are struggling with pornography. Is that true?
Well, yeah, right now it's about 2/3 men, 1/3 women.
Oh, wow. That's a lot higher than I thought.
And it's
okay.
growing for women, and
Okay.
I can talk about the differences too, because they are very different.
Okay. So yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about the differences. I think I was just curious, I've read some really interesting social science pieces and books about the chaos, the sexual chaos we're in now, and the part that birth control has played in what we've seen now. So I just would love to hear if you have any thoughts on that, what our contraceptive culture and mindset, if that at all has contributed to this, because I guess the triangle that was formed, or the path that was made in this, was, okay, well, we have birth control. We have all these women rising to power, doing these jobs, kind of pushing men out of the workforce, becoming, these strong, independent women. We don't need men. And then men are sitting at home playing video games and watching porn. And it's like, well, has this switch in roles of men and women in our culture, and the valuation of men has decreased in our culture, could that also be contributing to the rise of pornography use? Because, well, men have nothing. What are they doing? Like, what is their mission? What is their call? Is it kind of a highlight of a greater problem in our culture of like, wow, men are starving for a cause. Like, if they're out there fighting, providing, living, they wouldn't really have as much time to look at porn as they have now. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, and I think, when you're talking about, women, rising these positions of power, and men at home, playing video games and watching porn, I think with that, we kind of go back to the whole feminist movement, which basically ultimately said, okay, women don't need men. Women don't need men. They can do it all on their own, and so men are like, okay, you don't need me. That's fine. I'll stay home. I'll play video games.
Right.
That's it. That happened there. But, with the contraception, birth control, going back to the sexual revolution, initially, it was the question was, well, why should, a person have to worry about an unplanned pregnancy when they're having sex? If we can create this pill that takes away the worry about that, isn't that going to be great? It's going to liberate people. Well, what happened was, that the sexual revolution, the free love, really didn't liberate anybody. It didn't, because it created an environment, like I said, where we looked at sex, it wasn't about having children. It wasn't about relationship anymore. It was just about personal pleasure, personal sexual satisfaction. That's what it was about. And of course, pornography fed into this, let's just have the best orgasm possible. So, really what happened was, it really, especially with women, the sexual revolution didn't liberate women. What it did was it created a culture that continued to exploit women, to simply use them, you know. And then, of course, women, with the feminist movement said, well, we can do the same. We're just going to use men. So it created a culture of people simply using each other. That's what we call it, the sexual utilitarian philosophy, all about using. That's what birth control did. It did. There was no longer a need for a relationship anymore. It's just let's use each other. Mm-hmm.
I have a question kind of along with that theme of contraception. Is there any research? Do you guys have any research about couples that come to you and if the majority are contracepting or if the majority are practicing a natural method? Do you have any data on any of that?
I can say for my practice, most are coming in practicing natural family planning, or want to. Oftentimes I'll get a couple where one wants to use natural family planning and the other one doesn't. And it could be either one, husband or wife. And it's just talking about, okay, let's dig deeper into this. What is natural family planning? It's not just the rhythm method. And why do you want to use that? We get into those conversations, but I have to say most of the couples that I work with are practicing natural family planning.
Go ahead, Emily.
I feel like couples that are practicing natural family planning, I feel like they take their faith seriously. And I think that that's just a good example of no marriage is, what's the word? I'm blanking, protected from this external. I mean, it really is at our fingertips. And you can think that you're practicing, living your faith, but that doesn't mean that anyone can't be tempted at any time. And even people that do have a history with it, the statistic of 50% viewing it once a month to me, that's still an issue, but I find that interesting that it can be controlled to just once a month. And so just knowing that 50% do that, that just makes it even more common to me. I know that it's very common, but I guess I have an idea that somebody that's viewing it is looking at it more frequently, but it sounds like, that can definitely not be the case. And it still be a huge factor within a marriage.
It is. And I have to tell you, whatever statistics you hear of or read about pornography use are probably gross underestimates of what's really going on there. Because the fact is, there's no way we could really measure it all. This is the World Wide Web we're talking about. But we do know from the statistics we do have that it is serious.
So what would you say, you touched a little bit about, what you say to couples that are engaged or how you counsel, clergy when they're talking to engaged couples. How do you counsel or how would you counsel young people who are dating and it comes up that someone has looked at porn or been involved in porn, not involved like participating in it, but like involved in like watching it. Do you recommend that they continue on in that relationship or that they break up? I mean, it kind of, from what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like you kind of can't avoid it. No matter who you pick nowadays,
No.
Someone's seen it somehow, some way.
Yeah, I don't recommend that they break up. They don't have to do that, but I think they have to talk about it.
Right.
They really have to talk about it. Why does a person use pornography? What does it do for them? What does it mean? How does it make the other person feel? In working with couples, I just always ask, tell me about pornography in your lives. How has it affected your life? Like I said, I don't ask them if they've ever viewed it. I just say, tell me about it, because I know that they have.
Wow.
And I said, well, let's look into the future. Okay, you're engaged to get married. Let's say you have children. All right. Do you want to have this in your home with children? Why or why not? All right. And usually they'll say no, and why not? Well, then, they give all the negative reasons for it, and they say, well, yeah, that's good for children, but don't you think they would also be good for adults too?
Right.
And they, you can see the light bulb go off over there, like, yeah, but again, but it's also about helping them understand what is God's plan for sexuality. Not the what is the plan, but also the why of it all.
Right.
And why would pornography prevent them from experiencing the joy of God's plan?
Right.
So, it's like, if you want them to eliminate the pornography from their life, you've got to replace it with something much better, much, much better. And of course, God's plan always is.
Right. So I have another scenario, and then I'd love for you to kind of shed some light on the differences between men and women and their use
Mhm.
of pornography or their interest in
Mhm.
pornography. So you just highlighted that, a lot of the couples, and maybe it's skewed because you are a Catholic counselor too. So
Mhm.
probably like Emily's point, the people that are coming to see you are very, committed to their faith. And so most likely then they would likely be using natural family planning and then also having maybe their marriage impacted by porn. But you touched on something that I know I've heard from our Protestant brothers and sisters who don't necessarily talk about the virtue of chastity, but instead this idea of abstinence before marriage and then,
Mhm. Mhm.
using some type of contraceptive within marriage when they're deciding to avoid a pregnancy, because to say no to their spouse in marriage for sex is something that they would biblically say is not healthy for the marriage, that they shouldn't deny each other. Um, and so I guess I hearing you say like, oh, well, the couples that are coming to you are using NFP. People that hear, oh, well, people who need counseling are using NFP. See, that just proves my point that you shouldn't have periods of abstinence in marriage because this is what happens. They're going to go to porn. And I've heard from
Mhm.
women who are mainly from other Protestant denominations sharing that, from the pulpit, from pastors, people of influence will say, well, men need to have sex this many times a week when they're married in order to have healthy relationships. And almost like
Mhm.
women are out of fear that their husband will be driven to porn or driven to
Mhm.
extramarital affair, which at this
Mhm.
point doesn't seem like there's much of a difference there, but driven to one of those
Yeah.
two things because they're not meeting their sexual quota for their spouse every week.
Mhm.
And that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because
Well, I hear that too, and I get frustrated because again, they're presenting sex as a need.
right,
You know
right,
that men have this need. Of course, women don't have the need, but men have the need, and women must fulfill that need. And there's no research on that. There's no scientific data on that. As far as any kind of sexual quota for men. No, no, and I think it's very important for couples to understand there are going to be times in your marriage when you cannot be sexual. Okay, wait till you have a bunch of little ones running around, then see how much sex you get. Okay,
right,
or couples had the joke. One couple was recently joking with me. They said, yeah, the doctor says after the birth of a child, no sex for 6 weeks. Okay, try 4 to 6 months.
right,
Especially when you have a colicky child who does not sleep.
right,
Or yeah, adults have to understand that you are not always going to be able to have sex. So let's say you have this colicky child and it's, weeks in between having sex, well, what is this man going to do if he's got this need that has to be
I know.
met?
Yeah,
It's insanity to me. It really is. We have to understand, yes, sex is this wonderful gift and we should, experience it and enjoy it as much as we can. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen all the time.
right,
There are going to be periods when we just simply cannot get sex. And when you get used to that and you can accept that, it's not hard. And of course, during those times of abstinence, it's a great time to work on the emotional relationship
right,
between a couple.
right.
Work on the marriage.
Yep. Gosh,
Mhm.
that's so good to hear you say, Dr. Kleponis, because that is by
Mhm.
far my biggest. I worked with Protestant women that have come to use NFP, and I've heard some things that they've heard from their pastors and from within the Protestant community, and I'm just like, I cannot believe people in
Mhm.
the name of Christ are saying those things. It's so heartbreaking to me.
And I challenge them to go to their pastor and just say, show me the scientific data on that.
Right. I'm like, come on,
Show
ladies,
me.
you must just
Yeah.
be so stricken by fear to think like, hang on, think about what he's saying. Like that doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
He went
Mhm.
that long before marriage not having sex, and all of a sudden he's
Yeah.
married and he has to have a certain amount of sex every week. Anyway,
And of course, we all know that sex is something that both the husband and wife should enjoy,
correct.
right? Do you think she's really going to enjoy it if she's doing it out of fear
No, right.
or obligation? I have to do this. I
Right.
mean, it's going to be like, okay, buddy, come on, let's get this over with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's so heartbreaking. Okay. So with the time we have left, let's dive into the differences. So men and women. You
Right.
said that we've got a
Right.
third of women are
Well,
using pornography too.
it's true. It's true. But it's different. First of all, we have to understand that men and women are wired differently. Our brains are very different. We men, our brains, we're pretty simple. We are visually focused, visually oriented. All right. We see a beautiful girl walk by, we look, it's automatic. So when it comes to pornographic media, we are mainly interested in the visual, the pictures, the photographs, the videos, the movies, all of that. Women are different. Okay. Women are more relationally oriented than men. I mean, sure, a woman likes to see a handsome guy, but she doesn't go crazy over it like men go over women. Okay. And because women are more relationally oriented, they are interested in a broader variety of pornographic media. So, in addition to the visual media, the photographs and the pictures, they're interested in things like literary pornography, the racy romance novels. A few years ago there was that big stink about that series of books, The 50 Shades of Grey. Well, I don't know what the fuss was, because for decades there have been these racy romance novels that had some pretty pornographic sex scenes in them. Okay, so this is it for women. Women are also interested in things like chat rooms. So because in a chat room you can be anybody you want. This false persona, and you're having these very sexual chats with other people. Well, guess what? In that chat room, she is basically writing her own romance novel, and she's the heroine, and she's writing out all these sex scenes. That's what's going on there. So it's really the eroticized promise of a relationship that draws women in. So there's a much broader variety of pornographic media, the visual, the literary, the interactive, all of that. So now when it comes to the use of pornography, where we talk about it's 2/3 men and 1/3 women, that's only the visual porn. When it comes to the other types of pornography, we really don't have accurate statistics on that. All right. But again, when we look at this hypersexualized culture that we're in, it doesn't surprise me that you might find just as many women getting involved with it as men. But with them, it's not simply the visual; it's the literary, it's the interactive, it's all the other types too that are really hard to measure and identify.
Emily and I encourage our listeners, especially young people, to be curious in a healthy way. Be curious about your desire, your sexual desire. Like, why do I have this desire? What is it for? Not just, I have this desire, I have to act on it. Not like an animal, but like a rational human being. And to have like a sense of wonder about it. What is this for? Why is there male? Why is there female? Why do we have different parts? Why does a woman carry a baby and a man doesn't? Like, to actually ask these questions and to be curious in a healthy way and to seek out answers that truly satisfy, because the culture is just going to keep throwing you a bone. Oh, you have it? Oh, here, satisfy. It's like, but that's just going to leave you empty in the end. So it seems as though, the younger we can get people hooked on the truth and aware of the truth, the better. But that being said, we're still raising children in a culture that, this is almost an inescapable topic. So how can we help empower parents, apart from just encouraging parents to not give children unlimited, unleashed access to the internet and phones all the time? What other resources, I guess, would you recommend? There's the book series by, have you heard of Kristen Jones, The Good Pictures, Bad Pictures?
Yeah.
Is that something that you would recommend, or are there other?
I would recommend that. Okay. Well, first of all, okay, when it comes to the first thing I think parents need to do is really provide their children with an adequate sexual education. It really does,
What does that
because
look like?
what they're getting in school is a basic plumbing course. What they're getting from the culture is that sex is all about using other people. We need to give them a really good, comprehensive sexual education that covers three parts. First of all, procreation. How are babies made? We need to know all of that. Okay. And then there's also the relational aspect, relationship. We talk about, the sex needs to be, unitive and procreative. Well, this is the unitive part of it. Understanding relationship, understanding commitment, understanding marriage, understanding love, all of that. Okay. And then also understanding that, this is, something that feels great. We kind of downplay the whole orgasm thing, but that's a big part of it. And that's a big draw for a lot of people. And young people understand, yes, this is a gift from God, and it's one of the ways that God wants us to really enjoy it, but within the proper context. So it's giving kids a really good, comprehensive sexual education.
And at what age do you think that should start?
I would say around age 10. Age 10. Yeah. Some parents wait till their kids are in later middle school, early high school to do it. That's too late.
Okay.
That is way too late. Now there are some good resources. I'm going to turn around here and pull one off of my shelf here. Um, there's a wonderful book called Wonderfully Made Babies: A Catholic Perspective on How and Why God Makes Babies for ages 9 and up. Okay.
Okay.
This is an excellent book for parents to read with their kids.
Awesome. I will link that in the show
Yeah.
notes. Awesome.
Yeah. And it was by Linda Giangiordano and Dr. Lester Ruppersberger. Dr. Lester Ruppersberger is a family practice physician. So, we got it both from the Catholic and also from a spiritual and the medical perspective on that.
Okay. That's awesome.
So, but there's that, but it's really education. We need to really educate, and we need to educate our kids on the dangers of pornography. Now, of course, there's the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures books, which is really great, and I believe that's also for ages 9 and up.
Yeah, and she has a junior book for ages 4 to 7, I think, too.
Yeah. There's another book that I love. It's called Plunging Porn, a bathroom reader. All right, and it's a funny book, and the way that you do this is that you don't simply give the book to your teenager and say, "Here, read this," because he's not going to do it. All right, so it's a funny book, almost like a comic book type of thing. And the author says, just leave it in the bathroom. Leave it in the bathroom. Leave it on the toilet. Eventually, he or she, whichever the teenager is, boy or girl, is going to get curious, and will pick it up. And that's one way to get them into it, to understanding it, and then later on you can have some good conversations with them. Right? And I think in our parishes, youth ministries need to address this. Right? And I know that in many of our parishes, because of the previous sex abuse scandals and everything, many pastors are terrified to say anything that has anything to do about sexuality. But if a parish has a good youth ministry, they need to address this issue.
With parents, right? Obviously, parents involved.
Parents, yeah,
right?
obviously, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay. I love the your 3-prong approach to sexual education. Especially, I think something that would be so powerful as a Catholic parent is the topic of pleasure, of sexual pleasure. That's something that Emily and I talk about a lot is, again, I would say for maybe more so our Protestant brothers and sisters, but they say, God created sex. Sex is good. It's like, yes, but for what purpose did God create sex? That it is good. And that what does that moment of pleasure? Again, this is that richness of theology of the body. That moment of pleasure is that experience we will have for all eternity at like a minuscule amount. We can't even imagine the ecstasy we will have in heaven. Like that is radical. That takes like the spiritual element of sex and sexuality to a whole new level. And it's a lot easier to just talk about sex as, body parts. Oh, and it makes me feel good. It's like, but no, there was a reason for that climactic experience because God wanted to be close to us and for us to be close to him. Was that correct?
And it's interesting how, Pope John Paul II said that men should wait. Men should wait, because when you think about it, here you are, here is this climactic moment where you're getting just a glimpse of the ecstasy of heaven. And who are you sharing that moment with? Your spouse, your husband, your wife. That is an incredibly bonding moment.
Right.
Incredibly bonding there, so
which images, sorry, Dr. Kleponis, can you correct me if I'm wrong here, and the reason why it can't just be through masturbation or through, it can't be a single person experience because God is Trinitarian. God is communal. So we have that experience with our partner, with our spouse, because we are imaging the Creator who is community. We can only experience true love, true ecstasy in communion with each other. Is that correct?
Exactly. That is correct. And for most people, when they do masturbate, what are they doing? They're fantasizing.
Right.
And in the fantasy, what are they doing? They're using that other person. Now, some people say, well, it's okay if you're thinking about your spouse. I say, no, because you're still using them. They're not really there to experience this with you. It's all about you and your own sexual pleasure. So, this is why I tell people that masturbation is not good, because ultimately it is a form of pornography where you're just using other people.
Right. This is obviously a very challenging conversation for couples to breach. So where do you recommend they begin?
Well, it is a very difficult conversation. What I recommend couples do is they get a copy of Christopher West's book, Theology of the Body for Beginners. You know, a very easy read. Read it and talk about it. Discuss it. What are you learning from this? What are you getting from this? You know, how can we use this to improve our sex lives, to improve our relationship in general, all around? So I tell people start with that. All right. Because when it comes to sex, okay, when it comes to, all right, the mechanics, we know that. Okay, we know how it makes babies. We know that it's good for the relationship. All right, let's bring God into the picture now. And let's ask what God's plan is for this. Because as I said, in the secular world, they can't answer the question of, what is sex for and what's the meaning of it. They can't answer that. But in our faith, in our church, we can answer that question, which gives us a firm foundation to stand on for, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it.
And Dr. Kleponis, you are an author yourself, and so I'd love to hear some about the books that you've written, especially the Integrity Restored, helping Catholic families win the battle against porn.
Yeah.
I guess, would you recommend reading that? Is that something parents could start reading? A couple could start reading together? At what state of their
Well,
relationship?
I've got a couple of books. I'm going to turn around and grab them off my shelf
Perfect.
right now. So, all right, there are two books that I have. One is called Integrity Restored, Helping Catholic Families Win the Battle Against Pornography. All right, and there was a second edition that just came out a few years ago about this. So, but it's two books in one. The first book talks about the pornography epidemic in America. The second half talks about what we can do about it and how we can protect ourselves, our marriages, and our families.
Oh, great.
So definitely recommend this. The other book I wrote specifically for couples whose marriages have been hurt by pornography. It's called Restoring Trust, A Couple's Guide to Getting Past Porn. And this is for marriages that have been affected by pornography use.
So that would almost be like a little marriage retreat, something you could do together during Lent or Advent or something like that.
Exactly. Right. Well, it's really for couples whose marriages have really been hurt by this. It's in three parts. The first part is understanding the addicted spouse and their disease. The second, and what is required for their recovery. The second part is understanding the offended spouse and their trauma and their recovery. And the third part is understanding the marriage and how it's been wounded by pornography use and how to heal that. Right, so this is what this is for. Yes.
And I almost feel like, again, correct me if this is maybe I'm overstating it, but because we live in the culture we live in, it's almost like every marriage could benefit from reading that. Like, even if you don't have an intense addiction, like you've been affected by, distorted ideas of sexuality and sex. So why not just, bring in another avenue of healing, whatever degree you need the healing?
Well, and I'll tell you, I think most of us, know of a couple that struggle with this. I'll tell you, I talk to so many parents who have adult children that are married, and they call me and say, help, my son-in-law is addicted to pornography, my daughter, whatever, and they want to know how they can help their son or daughter in their marriage. I get a lot of that. So something like this book, Restoring Trust, can help that. They can recommend that.
That's awesome. So awesome. Okay. I think we are about at time here. This has been so great. So many good resources. I will list everything in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's been great.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with, Dr. Kleponis?
Well, they can always go to our website, which is Integrity Counseling PA. That's PA for Pennsylvania. IntegrityCounselingPA.com.
Okay, I will have that in the show notes. One other thing, I guess, really quick to wrap us up. How did you get into this specific aspect of counseling?
By accident.
Okay.
I've been in practice for over 28 years now.
Okay.
And when I started, I made two decisions. Number one, I wanted to work from a Catholic perspective because I knew that would be the most healing. And number two, I wanted to work with men. Okay. I really did. And people ask, well, why do you want to work with men? I say, well, everywhere you go, you hear about women's issues, all about the women's issues. I say, what about the men? Men have issues too. So over the years, I worked with a lot of men and a lot of couples and families and so forth. But what I started to notice around 2008, 2009, around that time, there was a shift in my clientele. More men were coming to me struggling with pornography addiction. In fact, for many of the married men, it was actually their wives that were calling up seeking help. And they were looking for a Catholic recovery program. And I looked around everywhere. There was nothing available. So, I figured, well, I want to help these people. So I went back to school and retooled. I went through 4 different certification programs in the treatment of sexual addiction so that I could help these. And that's when I developed my recovery program, because like I said, there was no Catholic program out there. There were a lot of good secular programs, a lot of good Protestant programs. I have to tell you, when it comes to, addressing pornography addiction, the Protestants are light years ahead of us. We need to catch up. So I developed this program that, has been very successful, and I'm very proud of it because we've been able to help a lot of people.
That's fantastic. I probably should have led with that, but I was so eager to get started on our topic. So, this is just amazing. So amazing. I'm so glad we could have you on to highlight all the good work you're doing, and we will just flood people with all those resources. And if something should come up in the future, we'd love to have you back on. So thank you for your time.
I'd be happy to come back
on.
Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.